to Stuck in the Gravel. You're here with
Daniel
and Chloe. Today we will be discussing the 6th round of the Formula One season, held in Miami Gardens, Florida.
Now, on to Friday. There was one practice session. With the sprint format in play for the second time this season at the Miami International Autodrome, drivers had just 1 hour of practice to get to grips with the track and dial in their cars ahead of sprint qualifying later in the day. As such, there was a flurry of activity where the green light switched on at the end of the pit lane at 12:30 local time. The majority of the field kicking off their weekends with some leisurely runs on Pirelli's medium and hard compound tyres. There were some minor dramas in the early minutes, with Lando Norris reporting that tools had been left in his cockpit, an incident that will be investigated by the stewards post-session, and Yuki Tsunoda commenting that his seat height felt quite high. Around a quarter of the way into the session, it was George Russell who held P1 via a wild slide through turns 14 and 15 thanks to a 1 minute 28.058 seconds on mediums, 3/10 clear of Norris and a half a second gap upon Verstappen, who was in action shortly after becoming a dad. That compared to a Dutchman's pole sitting time of 1 minute 27.641 second in sprint qualifying and 1 minute 27.241 second in qualifying at last year's events. With plenty more time to come during the late session, runs on the softest red marked rubber. Before those runs started, Norris had another scare when he approached a slow-moving Esteban Ocon under braking for the turn 17 hairpin and narrowly avoided running into him. That incident also being noted by the stewards for a post-session investigation. When drivers finally made the switch to softs, with Russell's aforementioned benchmark still standing over teammate Kimi Antonelli, Williams' Carlos Sainz and the two McLaren drivers, the timesheets were sent into another frenzy of green and purple sectors. Piastri charged to the top of the timing screen as the checkered flag approached, despite a brush with the wall, the championship leader producing a 1 minute 27.128 second to finish comfortably clear of Leclerc, Verstappen and Williams pair Sainz and Alex Albon. A host of drivers behind missed out on representative soft tyre laps, though given that, Behrman lost control of his car exit in turn 11 and spun around into the turn 12 wall with 5 minutes remaining, bringing out the red flags. With the clock ticking down to 0, Isaac Hadjar's bright pink Racing Bulls car rounded out the top 6, from Russell, whose best time came on the mediums given Behrman's shunt, Tsunoda and Antonelli as Aston Martin's Fernando Alonso completed the top 10 places. Norris was another driver to lose out from the red flag, ending up 12th between the other V-carb of Liam Lawson, while Ferrari's Lewis Hamilton was in 13th. The Briton was followed by Kick Sauber racers Nico Hülkenberg and Gabriel Bortoleto, and the sidelined Behrman. Pierre Gasly and Jack Doohan put their Alpines 17th and 19th respectively, sandwiching the team's former driver Ocon, while the second Aston Martin machine, driven by Lance Stroll, completed the 20-strong pack.
On to sprint qualifying, where Russell was the fastest and Tsunoda missed out. After the championship leader Piastri topped the timesheets during the sole practice session of the weekend earlier on Friday, attention turned to setting the grid for the second sprint of the campaign as the sprint qualifying began at 4:30 local time. With the medium compound mandatory for SQ1, all of the drivers were sporting the yellow marked tyres as the 12-minute segment got underway. As several cars queued to exit the pit lane, Doohan claimed that Lawson had been released unsafely into his path amid a busy start to the session. Tsunoda, meanwhile, reported that he wished to change his helmet after struggling with the wind out on track. Red Bull teammate Verstappen seemed to be having no such troubles, the new dad initially going fastest before being displaced by Norris and then Antonelli, the Mercedes driver setting a benchmark of 1 minute 27.858 seconds. At the other end of the timesheets, the 5 drivers at risk after everybody had put a lap on the board were Doohan, Tsunoda, Bortoleto, Behrman and Hadjar, the latter having his time deleted. There were some hair-raising moments for some, with Leclerc and Bortoleto both having kissed the walls of the Miami International Autodrome during their efforts. Tsunoda's fate was soon decided, the Japanese driver having failed to reach the line to start his lap in time, while his former teammate, Hadjar, hauled himself up into the top 10. Behrman also did not make it to the line to begin his second effort. Another rookie, Doohan, did not escape the elimination zone, leading to the Australian voicing his frustrations to the team over the radio about when he was sent out amid traffic in the pit lane. While Russell went fastest up ahead, leading Antonelli in a Mercedes 1-2, those exiting in SQ1 were Stroll, Doohan, Tsunoda, Bortoleto and Behrman.
On to SQ2, Norris was quickest and there was late drama for Carlos Sainz. After a brief pause, 10 minutes went on the clock for SQ2, a segment in which the medium tyre is again mandatory. Antonelli once again looked strong as the session got going, the Italian beating Verstappen to P1 by just 0.02 of a second. This position was soon taken by Piastri, the McLaren man setting the pace on a 1 minute 27.354 seconds to go nearly 0.2 clear of teammate Norris. Others, meanwhile, opted to stay in the pits for the opening minutes, instead choosing to make just one run in the latter stages. Amongst those to leave it late was Gasly, who made contact with the wall through turn 16 but still slotted into 8th. An improvement from Ocon pushed the Alpine driver down into the danger zone, while Alonso and Hülkenberg also got themselves out of the bottom 5. However, Hamilton and Albon both subsequently moved themselves up into the top 10, pushing Hülkenberg, Ocon, Gasly and Lawson into being eliminated. Also exiting P15 was Sainz, the Williams driver having suffered a lock-up on his lap that forced him into the runoff area at turn 11. At the other end of the spectrum, the Spaniard's former teammate Norris had gone quickest. The people that were knocked out were Hülkenberg, Ocon, Gasly, Lawson and Carlos Sainz.
On to SQ3, where Antonelli surges to his debut pole. It all came down to the 8-minute SQ3 segment to decide the top 10 for Saturday's sprint, with all of the drivers running the mandated soft tyre for the final segment. Russell and Verstappen were the first to hit the track for an early run, the Mercedes man going 0.2 faster than the Red Bull on a 1 minute 26.791. The rest of the field, meanwhile, emerged for their own efforts with just a few minutes remaining. While Russell looked to be done after returning to the pits, Verstappen remained out on track, albeit on older tyres than the majority of his competitors, with all but Alonso running fresh rubber. Hamilton initially slotted in behind Russell, while Verstappen stormed through to beat Russell. A thrilling sequence that ensued as Antonelli went quickest of all on a 1 minute 26.482. And despite the efforts of Piastri and Norris, this secured the Italian his first pole position at a track he's never driven before. With the McLarens taking P2 and P3 behind the rookie, Verstappen was pushed down to 4th ahead of Russell in 5th. Leclerc and Hamilton claimed 6th and 7th for Ferrari respectively, while Albon, Hadjar and Alonso completed the top 10.
On to Saturday for the sprint race. Ahead of the sprint getting underway, one change was confirmed to the grid as Yuki Tsunoda, who ended a challenging sprint qualifying in P18, would start from the pit lane due to the setup of the suspension on his Red Bull being changed under parc ferme conditions. But there was further drama to come as torrential rain hit the Miami International Autodrome, with the start time approaching, leading to Leclerc suffering a premature exit from the sprint when he slid into the wall en route to the grid, putting him out of the event before it had even begun. Given the unpredictable nature of the conditions, with the rain having stopped prior to the 19-lap encounter starting, question marks remained over which tyre the pack would be starting on at the damp track. And when the tyre blankets were removed ahead of the formation lap, which would take place behind the safety car, it was revealed that everybody had bolted onto the intermediate tyres, with the exception of Carlos Sainz on the full wets. As the lights went out for the remaining 15 laps of racing, with the formation laps having added towards the count, Antonelli struggled to launch as well as the Piastri, with the pair going into turn 1 side by side before Piastri held the inside line to take the lead while Antonelli went wide, dropping down behind Norris and Verstappen in the process. The Mercedes driver took to the team radio to suggest that he had been pushed off the track just as Piastri began to build an early advantage from teammate Norris. Elsewhere, Alonso, still looking for his first points of the season, had enjoyed a strong start to move from P10 to P8, with Lawson also making gains in P9 after starting from P14. Another driver potentially under scrutiny, though, was Verstappen, having been noted for a full start for being out of position. Before this was also dismissed as requiring no further action. As lap 8 ticked down, Piastri was leading from Norris, Verstappen, Antonelli, Russell, Hamilton, Albon and Alonso. It looks like an intra-team battle could be on the cards at Mercedes, with Russell rapidly closing in on Antonelli in the fight for 4th place. There was also plenty of action a little further back as Albon chased down Hamilton in a scrap for 6th, the Williams driver being followed by Alonso in the process. By lap 11, questions were arising over whether anybody would gamble on a switch to the slick tyres, and Tsunoda became the first to make a move, driving into the pits for a set of used mediums to re-emerge at the rear of the field. Hamilton, who had been struggling for grip out on the track, became the next to switch to slicks by bolting onto the softs, with Stroll and Sainz soon following the suit for mediums. A flurry of action then ensued as Verstappen and Antonelli pitted, only for contact to occur between them as Red Bull released their driver just as a Mercedes man tried to pull into his box, resulting in debris scattering across the pit lane, while the Italian was forced to continue onto the pit exit. Back on track, Sainz suffered a sudden puncture, forcing him to return to the pits to retire. Piastri, meanwhile, made a stop on lap 14 for the mediums, leaving Norris out in the lead. It was not all smooth sailing for the Briton, though, who reported debris out on track following Sainz's issues, with replays showing that the Williams driver spun and clipped the wall. Norris subsequently pitted on lap 15 just as the safety car was called, following a heavy crash for Alonso, meaning that last year's Miami Grand Prix winner was able to re-emerge as race leader ahead of Piastri, Hamilton and Verstappen. Under investigation for that potential release in the pit lane, Albon, Russell, Stroll and Lawson. It was soon confirmed that Verstappen had received a 10-second time penalty, while replays showed that Alonso had been tagged by Lawson, which triggered a spin into the barriers, another incident that had been noted by race control and would be investigated after the sprint. As the safety car remained out on track for the final laps, Norris ultimately crossed the line in P1 to take the sprint victory ahead of Piastri, marking the Britain's first win since his triumph at the season-opening Australian Grand Prix.
On to qualifying. In Q1, where Verstappen led the way. As the dust settled on an eventful wet-dry sprint at the Miami International Autodrome, the attentions of the paddock switched to qualifying, which would decide the starting order for Sunday's Miami Grand Prix. While the session started slightly later than planned, at 4:15 local time, due to the sprint having also ended later than scheduled after the weather, which triggered a delayed start, there were questions over whether cars that picked up the damage in the sprint would be ready in time for Q1. Aston Martin allayed any concerns about Alonso's participation by confirming that the AMR25 had been repaired for qualifying following his crash out of the 100km dash. And Leclerc was also back in action for Ferrari after sliding into the barriers before the sprint formation lap, meaning that all 20 cars hit the track for Q1, all sporting the red marked soft tyres. After receiving a post-sprint penalty that dropped him out of the points, Albon again looked to be in trouble early in qualifying. After receiving a post-sprint penalty that dropped him out of the points, Albon again looked to be in trouble in the early stages of qualifying, with the Williams driver noted for a pit lane infringement after seemingly pushing into the fast lane ahead of Hadjar. This will be investigated after the session. Meanwhile, it was an advantage to Piastri as the first time laps went on the board. The Australian setting the pace with his effort of 1 minute 27.307 seconds to go nearly 3/10 faster than Verstappen. Hadjar, Russell, Antonelli and Lawson all opted not to post a lap time initially, leaving them all in the drop zone along with Stroll. As the minutes ticked down and the lap time started to tumble, Antonelli outplaced teammate Russell to go fastest, only for Verstappen to then become the first man to break into the 1 minute 26s at the top of the timesheets. Verstappen's fellow world champion, Hamilton, suffered a lockup during his effort, heightening the pressure for the Ferrari driver after finding himself on the bubble in P15. The other drivers at risk ahead of the final minutes were Ocon, Alonso, Gasly, Stroll and Behrman. While Verstappen remained in the pits, the rest of the pack were out on track trying to improve. With Alonso moving up to P14, Hamilton was dropped into the danger zone, but the Scuderia racer managed to haul himself up to P8, while Tsunoda also bettered his previous time to go P9. Bortoleto put himself into an impressive 11th, but his Kick-Sauber teammate was pushed into elimination in 16th. Alonso also found himself dropping down the order to 17th, with Gasly a disappointing 18th for Alpine ahead of Stroll and Behrman in 19th and 20th. Those knocked out in Q1 were Hülkenberg, Alonso, Gasly, Stroll and Behrman.
For Q2, Piastri sets the pace while Hamilton exits. Q1 pace setter Verstappen was the first to hit the track as Q2 got underway. The Red Bull driver heading out on a set of fresh soft tyres before promptly going on to a set on to set an early benchmark of 1 minute 26.643 seconds. After everybody had set a timed lap, it was Piastri who had made his way to the top of the timesheets with an eye-catching 1 minute 26.269 seconds, leading by 2/10 from teammate Norris, with Antonelli slotting into third ahead of Verstappen. At the other end of the spectrum, Russell was a surprise name in the danger zone with several minutes remaining. The Briton reported struggles with grip, having not been as comfortable as Antonelli during the weekend so far, while the other drivers at risk were Ocon, Doohan, Lawson and Hadjar, the latter having aborted lap. Following a lull in the action, the cars started to re-emerge for their final efforts into the final minutes of Q2. While Piastri seemed content to remain in the pits, Ocon was fighting to progress to Q3, and despite a big slide, the Haas driver hauled himself up to P9, pushing Hamilton into the elimination zone. Russell climbed up to P3, but Hadjar, Bortoleto, Doohan and Lawson all failed to improve, meaning that they were out of Q2. Perhaps the biggest shock, though, was that Hamilton found himself at risk, and then could not better his effort, meaning that he exited in P12 just hours after a promising P3 result in the sprint. So those drivers who were knocked out were Hadjar, Hamilton, Bortoleto, Doohan and Lawson.
In Q3, Verstappen delivers to clinch pole. An interesting mixture of names prepared to battle it out in the top 10 shootout, with the McLaren, Red Bull, Mercedes and Williams pairings joined by the remaining Ferrari of Leclerc and Haas of Ocon, the Frenchman making his first Q3 appearance for his new team. As all of the drivers completed an initial run, with the exceptions of Leclerc, who abandoned his effort after going wide, it was Verstappen who held provisional pole on a 1 minute 26.492, a mere 3 thousandths ahead of Norris in second, while Piastri was only 0.017 seconds away in third. Antonelli followed in fourth, with Albon just behind in fifth. With such incredibly fine margins at play, the scene was set out for a thrilling showdown in the final minutes of Q3, but who would come out on top? It initially appeared that Verstappen's chances of holding on to pole may be in jeopardy after a wobble in the first corner, yet the Dutchman managed to set purple sectors en route to going the fastest on a 1 minute 22.204. All eyes were on whether Norris could beat that, but a moment over the curb seemed to put paid to the McLaren's man's challenge, forcing him to settle for second. Piastri also failed to improve, while Antonelli split the two Papaya cars to take third, just one day after the Italian grabbed an impressive pole in the sprint qualifying. The other Mercedes of Russell slotted into fifth, ahead of the Williams duo of Sainz and Albon in 6th and 7th respectively, while Leclerc, Ocon and Tsunoda rounded out the top 10.
Now, on to Sunday for the race. With the formation lap completed, the 5 lights went out to get the Miami Grand Prix underway, and Verstappen initially got away smoothly, only to experience a slight lock-up into turn 1 which encouraged Norris to get alongside the Red Bull. However, a moment of contact between the pair saw the Briton run across the apex into turn 2 and drop a number of positions to end up in 6th, allowing Antonelli and Piastri through into 2nd and 3rd. The McLaren driver went on to report he forced me off. Meanwhile, there was trouble further back for Doohan, who made contact with the racing balls of Lawson and picked up a puncture. The damage ultimately proved too much for Doohan to return to the pits, the Alpine stopping out on track, which led to the deployment of a virtual safety car. Lawson had remained in the running, albeit at the back of the order. Shortly after the VSC period ended on lap 4, Piastri was quick to make a move on Antonelli to snatch P2, while Norris grabbed P5 from Albon, both welcome sights for the McLaren pit wall, with Piastri subsequently starting to cut into Verstappen's 1.5 second lead. Other moves were unfolding elsewhere, as Hamilton overtook Hadjar for 11th and Sainz took 6th from teammate Albon. Possible rain in 20 laps and it will be heavy if it hits, Alonso is being told by his race engineer. Race control, meanwhile, had noted the lap 1 incident between Verstappen and Norris before deciding that no further action was needed, with the same verdicts being given to Doohan and Lawson contact. As lap 8 ticked down, Verstappen continued to lead from Piastri, Antonelli, Norris and Russell, who looked to be struggling with his hard tyres. Sainz, Albon, Leclerc, Tsunoda and Ocon. It did not take long for that to change again, as Norris soon gained another position by getting past Antonelli. There was a heart-in-mouth moment for Alonso, who suffered a spin at the same corner where he crashed in Saturday's sprint, but fortunately managed to avoid the walls on this occasion. Back up front, further tense scenes were playing out as Piastri set about trying to overtake Verstappen, having closed right in on the Red Bull. 2 attempts on lap 11 fell short, with Verstappen told by race engineer Giampiero Lambiase to stay on the inside and make him work for it. All of this was allowing Norris, meanwhile, to chase down the lead in 2 cars. "It's super slippery to drive," Verstappen reported, seemingly in reference to the tyres. Piastri could wait no longer on lap 14 after the Papaya car was initially forced wide, backing out of a move. Verstappen then outbraked himself and went wide in the process, which allowed Piastri to cut back through to become the new race leader. And just 1 lap later, there was a sense of déjà vu for Verstappen as Norris closed in on the world champion. But this time, a move around the outside of turn 1 did not work for the Briton, leading the McLaren team to coach him over the radio on how Piastri found a way past. The battle got increasingly feisty by lap 18, with Norris pushing Verstappen wide into turn 11 to squeeze down the inside and take the position. The Briton subsequently handed the place back, having seemingly gone off the track when making the overtake, but then retook P2 in the lap later. Amidst this scrap, Piastri had checked out up ahead, having built on a 9-second lead. Bortoleto, meanwhile, became the first driver to pit on lap 20 to switch from the medium to hard tyres, just as light drops of rain looked to be falling at the Miami International Autodrome. Elsewhere, a thrilling fight was playing out for P10 between Ocon and Hamilton, with the Ferrari man eventually finding a way past the Haas to claim the final points paying position. By lap 24, the order ahead of Hamilton stood as Piastri, Norris, Verstappen, Antonelli, Russell, Albon, Sainz, Leclerc and Tsunoda. McLaren looked to be in a class of their own though, with Piastri leading by 8 seconds from Norris, while the latter had built the same gap back to Verstappen in 3rd, with the Mercedes pair getting closer to the Red Bull in 4th and 5th. Antonelli subsequently dived into the pits on lap 26, but experienced a slightly slow stop after having to wait for Sainz to go past in the pit lane, seemingly ruining the Italian's chance of undercutting Verstappen. Norris, meanwhile, was warned that possible light drops of rain could fall in 2 laps, mostly concentrated at turn 17. The pit stops were soon coming in thick and fast, with Verstappen the first of the top 3 to stop for the hard tyres. But back on track, Behrman was having mechanical problems. The Haas driver pulling off the track at lap 29, resulting in a virtual safety car being called. McLaren then called both drivers to pit in a double stack, allowing Piastri and Norris to re-emerge in P1 and P2 respectively, while Russell benefited from pitting under the VSC to take P3 from Verstappen. Others having a good phase of the race included the Williams team, with Albon picking off Antonelli for 5th, while Sainz had grabbed 7th from former teammate Charles Leclerc. But things were not going so well for Tsunoda, who had collected a 5-second time penalty for speeding in the pit lane. Also in trouble was Bortoleto, with the Kick Sauber driver told to retire the car after earlier complaining of engine issues. The Brazilian was ultimately unable to make it back to the pit and stopped on track, meaning that another VSC was deployed. After the VSC period ended, an exciting battle played out between the 2 Ferrari cars and Sainz, with Leclerc trying to overtake for 7th, a move that he subsequently pulled off, with Hamilton then following through to make the move into 8th. A debate ensued over the radio at the Scuderia as Hamilton, running on the medium tyres in contrast to the hards on Leclerc's car, suggested that he should be let by, leading the 7-time world champion to comment that the situation was not good teamwork as he was kept behind. After further frustrated messages from Hamilton, who sarcastically told the team to have a tea break while you're at it, amid a delay in making the call, the decision was eventually made to swap the cars. Elsewhere, Lawson became the 4th retiree from the race, the New Zealander returning to the pits. As lap 45 ticked down, Piastri remained 5 seconds ahead of Norris in the lead, while Russell was a whole 27 seconds adrift in 3rd, outlining the commanding performance of the McLarens. The Briton could not rest easy, however, as Verstappen was on the chase in the fight for the final position on the podium. Albon was running in 5th ahead of Antonelli, with Hamilton and Leclerc still in 7th and 8th, and that situation was not settled yet, with Leclerc having significantly closed the gap to his teammate. Intriguingly, Norris looked to be edging closer to Piastri as the Australian's advantage came down to just over 4 seconds after lapping some back markers. The stewards looked to be in for a busy evening post-race, having confirmed that they would investigate Sainz and Gasly for possible yellow flag infringements after the Grand Prix. But there was still plenty of action to be had out on track, as the race entered its final 5 laps, with Norris again cutting Piastri's lead down. Elsewhere, with Hamilton having been unable to close in on Antonelli, the Briton was asked to swap positions back with Leclerc. In an unusual turn of events, Leclerc had been told this before Hamilton, meaning that the 7-time world champion had not known he was expected to yield. When he had been informed, Hamilton followed the instruction, while Leclerc commented, "We'll discuss after the race." The drama was not over for Hamilton though, who found himself being hunted down by the Williams of Sainz. A last lap lunge from Sainz ultimately did not go in the Spaniards' favour and will also be investigated after the race, but there was no such problems up front, with Piastri crossing the line to clinch his 4th win of the season by 4.63 seconds from Norris in a sublime day for McLaren. Sainz and Tsunoda rounded out the top 10 ahead of Hadjar, Ocon, Gasly and Hulkenberg in 11th through to 14th respectively. Aston Martin meanwhile had a day to forget, with Alonso and Stroll completing the classification in 15th and 16th places. A total of 4 drivers retired from the event as Lawson, Bortoleto, Behrman and Doohan all failed to make the checkered flag. At the close of a busy weekend in Miami, Piastri has now increased his points tally to 131 points at the top of the Drivers' Championship, 26 points clear of Norris in second, while Verstappen remains in third on 99 points.
Following the Miami Grand Prix, the driver standings are as follows, with Oscar Piastri in first, Lando Norris in second, Max Verstappen third, George Russell fourth, Charles Leclerc in fifth, Kimi Antonelli in sixth, seventh is Lewis Hamilton, eighth Alexander Albon, ninth Esteban Ocon, 10th Lance Stroll, 11th Yuki Tsunoda, 12th Pierre Gasly, and 13th is Carlos Sainz. Nico Hulkenberg is 14th, 15th is Oliver Behrman, and 16th is Isaac Hadjar. Fernando Alonso, Liam Lawson, Jack Doohan, and Gabriel Bortoleto finish off the standings, all with 0 points so far in the season. Constructors' Championship standings, McLaren leads with 246 points, Mercedes second with 141 points, Red Bull are in third with 105 points, Ferrari are in fourth with 94 points, then Williams with 37 points, Haas are in sixth with 20 points, seventh is Aston Martin with 14 points, eighth Racing Bulls with 8 points, Alpine are in ninth with 7 points, and then Kick Sauber follow them closely with 6 points. Here at Stuck in the Gravel, we'd like to pay tribute to Jochen Mass, the esteemed German racing driver whose career spanned Formula One endurance racing and mentorship, who passed away on May 4th, 2025, at the age of 78 in Cannes, France, due to complications following a stroke he suffered in February. Born on September 30th, 1946, in Dorfen, Bavaria, Mass began his professional journey as a mechanic before transitioning into racing. He made his Formula One debut in 1973 with Team Surtees and went on to compete in 105 Grand Prix until 1982. His sole F1 victory came at the 1975 Spanish Grand Prix in Montjuic Park, a race overshadowed by a tragic accident that resulted in spectator fatalities.
Beyond Formula One, Mass achieved significant success in endurance racing. He won the 1989 24 Hours of Le Mans with Sauber Mercedes, partnering with Manuel Reuter and Stanley Dickens. Throughout his sports car career, he secured numerous victories and became a loyal member in teams like Porsche and Sauber Mercedes. Mass also played a pivotal role in mentoring young talents, notably guiding Michael Schumacher during his early career with Mercedes. His insights and experience were invaluable to the next generation of drivers. After retiring from active racing, Mass remained connected to the motorsport world, working as a television commentator and participating in historic racing events. He is survived by his wife Bettina, 2 daughters and 2 sons from a previous marriage. Jochen Mass's legacy is marked by his versatility, sportsmanship and contributions to motorsport, both on and off the track. Here at the Stuck in Gravel, we would like to extend our deepest condolences towards his family.
Thank you for tuning into our podcast.
I've been Dan.
And I've been Chloe, and this is Stuck in the Gravel.